Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Today's video is brought to you by language, because without language, this wouldn't mean anything. Neither would this, or this. Okay? In this video, I want to talk to you about fantasy versus reality. Recently, I was on a radio talk show in Ireland, which I was happy to participate in, and I got a question there, and we started talking something about, what's the difference between fantasy and reality? And I thought I gave a decent answer, but I wanted to nerd out a little bit more. I looked into the matter a little bit after the interview, and I also talked to Peter about it. And one of the things that I didn't get to mention is, or I didn't get to mention as clearly, is where don't you find fantasy? Like, if you look into something, and if you really start to look, what I failed to mention, and I don't think I really got across, was like there is fantasy pretty much everywhere. It's all over the place, and there's an impact that it has on one's as if reality and or their experience of what's real that could easily be overlooked. So let's dig in a little bit more into, what constitutes a fantasy. Okay, so basically a fantasy is something that you want to be true but isn't. And it's like a thought about reality that you say you want to be the case but isn't. So here are some examples, and let's dig in a little bit. Where do we find fantasies? All right, let's start with enlightenment. What are the fantasies of enlightenment? Well, it's pretty much everything that you think it is, everything you've heard somebody tell you it is, every book you've ever read, and every thought you've ever had about any book you've read is of necessity a fantasy, which is to say it's a thought about the matter that isn't actually the matter. Anything that is not actually an experience of what's being talked about, and then it gets even worse with enlightenment, because enlightenment isn't an experience. Now, I just said something, and about what I just said, whatever you got, that's a fantasy. That's a thought about it. Now, do you have a feeling about what I just said? That's also fantastical. And or it is not the thing itself. See, fantasies also include, like, say in the realm of enlightenment, like, how is a spiritual teacher supposed to look? What way are you supposed to live? If you are a spiritual seeker, how are you supposed to live? See, who told you that? You see, and then that gets into perhaps the realm of fantasy again, where, if I'm a spiritual seeker, I have to, like, have you ever watched videos of people who are enlightened or whatever, and then they say they have the clothes, and perhaps they have the enlightened way of speaking, and everything is calm, and they are centered and at peace. See, where does that come from? You're enlightened means you have to be peaceful. No, but you see the fantasy. I don't think I fit the fantasy. See, I don't wear the right clothes. I don't have the right diet. I don't do the right things in terms of what though? How if I'm being compared to, like, say, a spiritual teacher or a spiritual guru or an enlightened master, right? How do I stack up to the norm? Now, who the fuck created the norm? See? Where? That's fantasy again. Spiritual worlds, mostly fantasy. We need to love each other and feel good all the time. Who the fuck said? We are consciousness ascending. Well, who? Okay, we're an ascending consciousness. What the fuck is that? What is that? Well, where did you hear about that? Well, I read it in a book. Whose book? And where did they get their knowledge? You see what I'm saying? And then how does that all even, what the fuck? And people who are in, like, the enlightened spiritual communities, because they have, like, a certain way of talking, a certain vibe, certain belief systems about how it's all supposed to go, certain cosmologies, they all agree about that, and then they live out this lovey-dovey fantasy about spirituality and then pretend like that is somehow going to get them enlightened. I don't know. Looks to me to be the case. But it's a fucking fantasy. Or like rainbow gathering, right? Say people go to rainbow gathering. Now, I am not saying that this stuff isn't really great. I spent some time with some dance community or a dance community in Houston. I fucking love those people. Beautiful. Felt really good. It's very healing, very healthy. But it doesn't move you towards enlightenment, and they didn't really seem any more conscious than anybody else. So it's like that part was like, no, they're not being straight with that. Lovely people, beautiful community. Rainbow gathering, they all go, and it's all love, and blah, 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 and it feels great. But then what do you do after rainbow gathering? You go back to, quote, real life, your job, your work, you make money. Somehow you got to eat, right? How do all those people eat? Well, they live the normal life, but then they live out this other fantasy life. Now, okay, nothing wrong with that. You get the difference between fantasy and reality. So the fantasy of the rainbow gathering is very different than the reality of being at one. You know, they probably don't include in the fantasy, well, the sweat and the bugs and, you know, if somebody's sick, well, they have to do that. And then, you know, within the, whatever. It doesn't include like the experience of it. Now, martial arts, another one. I do tons of martial arts. You go in the Taekwondo world, there's usually a big fantasy surrounding getting a black belt and what that all means in that community. And then if you're a teacher, there's a bunch of unspoken rules. Oh, you have to respect in certain traditions, and then what you're going to get if you follow in this tradition. You see, all that's fantasy. Aikido, it's the fantasy of the samurai warrior, right? And then people strut around and they wear big flowy pants as if they're a samurai warrior. When's the last time they killed somebody with a sword? You know? So all that's fantasy. The pants and the meaning of the pants, and the whole room is set up a particular way, and you know, it's very clean, and you bow to the master, and there's like all this stuff that goes along, and the stuff is not the movement of the bodies. It's not the feeling of the pressure. It's not the sensations or the experience of doing a really excellent throw. You see, the throw itself, minus all the fantasy, is like this feeling of two bodies interacting in space. And it doesn't have all that other shit with it. You see, but all the other stuff will tend to get in there, and it's sort of like, so while I'm doing the throw, I am the samurai, and there's a whole mindset about that, say. You see, where does that mindset even come from? That's, again, the fantasy. It's not the reality, as if the experience of the throw itself. See, so it's like, let's see, where else do we find that? Yeah, I'm sure MMA fighters have fantasies. Now, their fantasies are more grounded in the reality, but they might be like, I'm a fighter, and then they might have a cauliflower ear or something, and the cauliflower ear has special meaning in that world because it means that they fought and they're a warrior or whatever. See, but the fantasy is different from the reality of being in there, beating the crap out of somebody and getting the crap beat out of you. It's like this, that's very raw. And okay, like that seems to cut through a lot of crap also. You might be in a corporate world or something. Like entrepreneurs. I've looked on enough entrepreneurial stuff. There's the people who, as Gary Vaynerchuk might say, they tweet or hashtag the hustle, or they tweet the hustle, or they're into the hustle. It's like, I'm into the hustle, and like I've got a side, what do they call my side hustle, and they're all talking themselves up like, I'm a big shot entrepreneur and da-da-da-da-da. And trying to live out the fantasy of being an entrepreneur rather than just being an entrepreneur. And so the fantasy, again, gets mixed up with the reality of being an entrepreneur. What's the reality? Well, it's probably a fuck ton of hard work, ups and downs, solving problems, you see, and making sure that your business is a success, which means you know about money and you make many, many distinctions about that. And the fantasy of being an entrepreneur is like, I've got the fancy cars and the cool clothes and all of the status and da-da-da. And then, people are looking up to me, like maybe I go on Gary Vaynerchuk's podcast or whatever. And then that's the fantasy of hustle. It's not the reality of hustle, say. You see? And then, so the value or what I'm trying to contribute here is trying to make a distinction between fantasy and reality, and then show you by giving a multifaceted approach, perhaps, is many different cross sections of where you might find the fantasy. And the people that do things powerfully relate to the reality of the situation, and they know the reality, and they relate to that instead of the fantasy. And one of the things that people get if they relate to a lot of fantasy is their self becomes less real. What I'm trying to say with that is I have seen people that are so concentrated on living a fantasy that their person has no more substance or a much reduced power, because they're busy acting out a fantasy world that at the end of the day, there's nothing there that is substantial, that we could say is real. So now if you want to reveal this world to yourself, I would invite you to question, and you could get even more rigorous as well. It's like you could question, well, what's the reality of what I'm doing, and what do I fantasize about that it could be? Like in my own shoes, for example, you see, I did martial arts apprenticeships, which is like insane amounts of work. And I even heard about that it's good to get rid of the fantasies, and I tried to get rid of the fantasies before I even showed up for an apprenticeship. But I showed up for an apprenticeship and I still had fantasies about like, oh, what is it going to be like to learn from a martial arts master? See, doesn't that lend itself really well to images of the master up on the hill, like an enlightened martial arts master? See, what images does that bring up? All those images, they aren't it. What feelings does that bring up? The feelings of, oh, I'm going to go through all this struggle and it's going to be so great and da-da-da. And at the end, I'm going to come out, I'm going to be a blah, blah, blah. You see, all that like stuff, all that stuff is fantasy. All the feelings, all the emotions about it, see? Because when I contrast what I had before with the reality of doing the work, the reality of getting my ass kicked, the reality of hours and hours and hours every single day of training, that is boring, frustrating, challenging, just the same crap every day, like pretty much. The reality of it is more the latter, not the former. There's no bright, shiny achievements. See? And that's again, I'm trying to elucidate the distinction between the fantasy about what you think you're going to get from doing something and the reality of going about getting the thing. Two totally different domains. One of them's real and the other one is not, or as real as we can get. Okay. See, it's the experience of actually doing it, or what would it be like to be a gold medalist gymnast? Oh my God, the fame, the glory. Yeah. What about those thousands of hours of grueling work with just you and your coach? You know what I'm saying? That's not fun. That doesn't sound like fun. See, that's not like the fantasy. What's the fantasy of being a CEO of anything? See, you could question. So then how do you get at the matter and expose more of this stuff? Like, question yourself. What are the fantasies? What do I think about something? And what's the reality of something? Where do I think it's going to get me? What do I think it's going to be like? And then what is it really likely to be like? What do I think something's going to do for me if I do it? And then do the thing and then see if what you thought about it stacks up to the reality of actually getting it done. It will not. Even the thought that you might have, like right now, you might have a thought about what you're going to go do. That thought that you have right now is not the experience of what you're about to go do. And the thought is, as Peter would say, you wouldn't even likely notice how wrong you are, because I could have a thought about going over to the refrigerator and getting some dinner, but the reality of it is a totally different thing than the thought I'm having now. And I won't include every single thing that I do between now and then. Like the thought I have now is not and likely cannot ever be accurate. Now, like really accurate, Because who knows? I might stub my toe between here and there. Did you think of that? A meteorite could come crash through the ceiling. Did you think of that? I mean, likely it's not going to happen. See, did I include everything I'm going to do? Okay, I'm going to go there. I'm going to take this shirt off, change out of this clothes, get into some other clothes, make some dinner. But did I include every single step along the way? What if something goes wrong? What if something's missing? See? My thought isn't complete, and it's not going to match the future experience. See, and this is getting even more, we're nerding out now. They're getting even more rigorous with what do you think is going to be versus what will be. Not the same. And then apply that broadly to everything you have. See? And another excellent example, just to close here, and this I also had on the interview, but it's if you look up Ki Master versus MMA, you will see a big difference between fantasy of martial arts versus the reality. See? This guy who could do no-touch throwing, and all his students bought into the fantasy, and you can actually see his students flipping their bodies on the ground, and so it even looks like they're engaged in a whole activity about this no-touch martial arts throwing. And then the guy had the balls or the ovaries, whatever you want to call it. He to his credit, he said, "All right, open challenge. I'll fight somebody." And an MMA guy said, "I take you up on that challenge." And the MMA guy came in and wasted him. Why? Because the guy didn't know how to fight. He thought he did. He was fantasizing about how he did. And then, no. See? So that's fantasy versus reality. Or, I'm just thinking about more stuff. You wear yoga pants. What are the yoga pants for? Say, if you're a woman, you wear yoga pants. The dudes really like it. If they're straight, whatever. It doesn't matter. See, it's like, whoa, dang. But what? Yeah, and you have a yoga mat, and then there's a whole space set up to devoted to yoga, and it's got a look and a feel. Doesn't yoga have a look and a feel and like a whole thing? All that look and feel and whole thing, that's like fantasy stuff. The reality of doing yoga is you do the yoga. And then they might have something about I do yoga, and then it's bringing me closer to God, or there's union, or there's a whole story wrapped up in the yoga itself. That story is likely fantasy. See, you go to a coffee shop. You're what you call it? Those guys. You know them when you see them. They got a high ponytail. They have moleskin books where they can take notes. They sit around and they're attractive, muscly, maybe some tattoos, and they're dark and brooding, and they're like unhappy artist types that hang out in coffee shops and go to poetry slams. You see, and they have a whole lifestyle built up around being this unhappy poet or whatever. See? All that shit. The glasses, the look, the feel, the vibe, all that. It's fantasy. Then there's the reality of doing poetry, whatever. See what I mean? I'm trying to extract this for you so you can see the difference and start to get it experientially. Oh, yeah. And then consider, where isn't there fantasy? Don't you have some idea about a perfect husband or perfect wife, even? Intimate relationships? There you go. What would you ultimately want in an intimate partner? Likely has tons of fantasy. Happily ever after. There's no happily ever after. We're all going to die. Think about that one. Or somebody, if I get an intimate partner, they're somehow going to fix me. Finally, my heart will be open, and then blah, blah. No. At some point, anybody who's married for any length of time knows the difference between getting in a relationship that's, it's full of promise and love and da-da-da-da-da, and then they're married for 10, 20 years, and it's like, you again. Okay. But it's just the fantasy goes away. The reality is, okay, we're in a partnership, and your body's going to age, then die. One of you is going to die first, probably. See, I don't include that in the fantasy of getting married, do they? Don't think so. They say until death do you part, but do you really know what that is? Like the implications? Yeah. Okay. Can't really think about anything else. I've just been beating this like a dead horse. Now, you might consider with my talking that obviously I am in a certain direction. Fantasy, I'm like, nah. Go towards a reality. What's actually real? So then you might make up the fantasy of being the Cheng Shin person, which is like, I'm going to be brutally honest and and I'm going to live this code of honor as a really honest person, and I have to be honest. No, you don't. You can lie. See? Then again, like it gets tricky again. Oh, all religion? Pfft, fantasy. Fucking fantasy. So all religion, by the way, just bullshit. Okay? Now there are some good points in some religions, but religion itself is complete nonsense. And you don't need it to be a good person, but that's another thing. See, so then you might have the fantasy of being a Cheng Shin person, and then that's the warrior way with the honest and and I'll be like an apprentice and And you might turn that into a fantasy, or the Ralstonian way, or the Brendan way, or whatever. No. See, that's more fantasy. So it can get really tricky is what I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. So what do you do about that? You don't have to do anything. What could you do about it? Well, you could question it. You could discover fantasies you have and then discover deeply the difference between a fantasy and reality. And then you decide if you want to let them go or not. You could do that. And you might find something more real, more powerful, more grounded, more solid if you work in that direction. And it might have an impact on your experience. Might even have an empowering and positive impact on your experience, but you don't know until you try it out. So there you go. So that's what I've got for you on this. This is Brendan Lee from thebrendanlee.com in support of consciousness and skill worldwide. If you want to get serious, please check the links in the description. I've got a free course so I can get your email and then talk to you about other workshops. Definitely come to a workshop. They kick ass. We do them here in Texas and internationally, but mainly here. Okay? Check the links. Much love. I'll catch you later. Take care.